friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to tell you why you might want to consider taking a lot of those hard dry beans that you have stored in buckets or containers of some kind, cook them up and then dehydrate them. I know it sounds really redundant. The first time I heard about this quite a number of years ago, I thought, well, how silly. Why would you dehydrate beans that were dry in the first place just to put them back in storage? Well, that was before I learned something about dry beans and storage. So when it comes to dry beans, whether it be pinto beans, kidney beans, navy beans, black turtle beans, whatever it is, doesn't seem to matter how you store them. The longer they stay in storage, the harder they will get and eventually get to the point where you can't even cook them. You can cook them for 3 days and they'll still be hard and dry in the center. And at that point, you can still use them. You can always grind them up for a flour if you like using bean flour, which I personally don't, but some people do. So they can still have use. It's just you can't use them in the way that you might like to use them in. So what I've been doing is taking my pinto beans and making a big batch of Tar Heel beans. We might eat on that for a couple of dinners, and then I take the rest and dehydrate them up. I've then also been taking my red kidney beans and doing the same thing. So whenever I make a big pot of chili, a big pot of the Tar Heel beans, I then practice this same thing and dehydrate it up as is. So the great thing about that, so these 4 jars here represent the batch of chili I did. And I do have a lot of chili canned up. So making the chili, canning it up, and that is nice. The thing about dehydrating is it's going to take up less space and you don't have to worry about filling up your whole canner, because I have a pretty good sized canner, and so when I'm canning chili, I do have a smaller one now, so that's nice too if I'm doing smaller batches. But if maybe you just have a little bit you're going to can and you don't want to waste the space in your canner, you don't want to have to worry about filling the whole thing up, you can simply dehydrate it. It's really easy. I use sheets like this, and I'll link to these particular ones down below because they do come in both the size to fit the larger Kasori and the Excalibur, and I believe would also work in the what's the other one, Cabela's. And then this size here, which fits the smaller Kasori, which is what I have. You can also get the round ones through Bright Kitchen to go in, like if you have a Nesco type dehydrator. The only problem with that is somebody emailed me recently, and the new ones that she got, she had an old set and then she got a new set. She said they're really, really thin. And that could be why they're dropping the prices. Maybe they're making them even thinner. But at any rate, they are, an investment just like your dehydrator. But I tell you what, it sure makes life easier for dehydrating all kinds of liquids, be it eggs, bone broth, like I have right here, some turkey bone broth that I dehydrated and powdered up, milk, yogurt, anything you don't want to stick or that's going to run. The silicone sheets are really good for that. And yes, you can, for some things that aren't going to run out, you can use parchment paper, but it's going to be more tricky with things that are very liquidy, such as milk. So anyway, moving on from there, let's talk real quickly about how to go about this. And that is, once you're ready to dehydrate your cooked beans, and you can just cook them plain. You don't have to season them like the Tar Heel beans, which if you're interested in my recipe, I'll link to it down below. I don't have a chili recipe out yet. Maybe one of these days I'll finally, I just make it however suits me at the time. So I don't have a set recipe I go by. I don't even have a set recipe for these either. So I could just do it. But at any rate, once you have whatever it is you're wanting to dehydrate, you simply spread it onto your sheets. With the chili and the Tar Heel beans, you might be able to get away with parchment paper for that if that's what you have. And then I dehydrate for meats and broths and anything like that's already been cooked. I always go with a higher temperature, which is, for me, is 125 degrees. I know you can go much higher than that. I just prefer not to go over 125 degrees with anything, especially when I'm using the silicone sheets, even though they're supposedly heat safe. A lot of things I don't dehydrate above 115. So anyway, about 12 to 18 hours in your dehydrator. How thick you lay it on there, the type of dehydrator you have is going to have some say in how long it's going to take. And also the other thing is how humid it is in your home. This is why I never give exact numbers, because it's going to vary depending on your dehydrator and the humidity in your house, or if you're dehydrating outside like I do in the summertime. So if you're new to dehydrating anything, it's a matter of just, after a few hours, check whatever it is you're dehydrating and then keep checking it. And you'll know. I mean, these dehydrate up beautifully. In fact, I have one of these jars here is open, so I can show you. I can show you in the clips too. It's just, they're very dry. They're not going to look the same as your beans, in their original dry form. You'll also have little bits of the sauce or whatever, like for your chili, your Tar Heel beans. It's going to be dried up in there. You want to leave that. You don't want to strain all that liquid off. You want to leave it in there because there's a lot of flavor. And then when you go to use it, it only takes a few minutes to cook it up. I love that. It really doesn't take much longer than taking a jar of home canned chili or Tar Heel beans or any kind of other bean and putting it in a pot and let it heat through. It doesn't take that much longer. You simply add water. I don't have an exact measurement for you. I just throw things together. Put the dry chili in there, put the dry pinto beans in the pot, cover them with water, and then cook them for a few minutes. If it looks like it needs more water, add more water. Just don't put too much water in at a time. I would say just put enough water that it covers your dry beans, and then maybe 5 minutes of cooking them on medium heat on your conventional range or your wood stove or whatever it is you're using, and it should be ready to eat. And even though it will look a little bit different, I found that they cook up beautifully. They taste great. They taste just as good to me as the ones that I've canned or even fresh before canning or dehydrating. So here's the thing about this is when I store them, I do vacuum seal them into jars. And because of this, they're not going to take up less space than the dry beans that you have put into a big bucket or however you're putting them up, because, well, you've got all these jars taking up space. And the dehydrated beans, unless you're going to powder them, they don't save as much space as certain other dehydrated foods. For example, I would say that if this was fresh chili, it would probably fill up about 1.5 pints. So a jar just like this plus another half jar. So I'm not saving as much space. I'm still saving some though. And when you add it all up, well, there's one jar and there's one jar. That's 2 jars of space I'm saving, pint jars that is, in my storage. So you might cut the space down to about 50% that you're saving. And that is in comparison to canned. But anyway, I do vacuum seal all these just to help keep them fresh. If you have any fats in there, because like my chili has meat in it, and I think that the Tar Heel beans do have some meat in them as well, I prefer to keep them vacuum sealed because if there's any fat in there, the vacuum sealing is going to prevent that fat from going rancid. So especially with something like bone broth, I do leave fat in there. And so I don't want it to go rancid. So vacuum sealing will prevent that. And I have plenty of videos on vacuum sealing. And I use the brake bleeder method. There's electric methods you can use. There's battery operated methods you can use. And I'll link to the last video I did on options for vacuum sealing. And they don't have to cost a lot of money. You don't have to run out and buy a food saver. I gave up on food saver a long time ago. I do not use it anymore. So my brake bleeder pump has been my favorite thing to use for vacuum sealing jars. Sometimes I use that in conjunction with the chamber that Patrick makes. If I have jars that are not canning jars like this, they're like recycled pickle jars, or usually for us it's green olive jars. I'll recycle those, and if I want to vacuum seal them, I'll use the chamber. And yes, they will last for years like this, especially if they stay vacuum sealed and stored in a dark place, especially if it's a cooler place. It doesn't have to be cold, just cooler, the coolest part of your home. This is why a lot of people will use basements, root cellars, and more. That's just going to help it last longer. A lot of things can do just fine if it's just hot in the summertime, but to really preserve the nutrients for a longer period of time, cool is best if you can pull it off. Around here, it stays pretty cool most of the year, and we just have or one of our kids' old bedrooms that we turned into a big pantry, and it stays plenty cool in there most of the year. I have dark curtains over the windows, so no natural light comes in at all. Only the light when we need to turn it on to go in there and find something is the only light they get exposed to. But that's just to prevent nutrient loss. It's not going to have light exposure, and some heat isn't necessarily going to spoil the food and make it inedible. It's just the light exposure is one of those things that degrades the nutrients in your stored foods. It doesn't matter if it's freeze-dried, dehydrated, or canned. It doesn't matter. And then I did bring the turkey broth out, not only just to show that you can do this, and I have a video on this, but also because if, let's say you're doing just a plain dry bean, and you just cooked them up so you could then turn around and dehydrate them and have a more instant meal in a smaller form and all that, then you could always add some broth. If you're dehydrating up your bone broth of any kind, add a little broth to that for flavoring and whatever seasonings when you go to rehydrate it. So anyway, I hope you found this video helpful and that I covered everything I meant to cover. It just seemed like that was pretty simple, but it is a pretty simple process. It's really easy to do. I love dehydrating more and more all the time. It's one of my favorite methods for most things, not everything. Some things I'll always still prefer to can, such as my homegrown green beans, the meatballs, and a few other things. But most things now I dehydrate because they take up far less room and ease of use. And if you'd like to learn more about dehydrating, I'll put my full dehydrating playlist down below, as well as I think in that list you'll find a video about a couple of videos maybe on how to use dehydrated foods, even though I do try to cover some of that in every one of the videos, such as the dehydrating eggs video and how to use them and all the many things you can use them in. So usually I cover that in my videos, but some of my older ones maybe I didn't, but typically it's pretty simple. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Any thoughts, ideas? If you're taking some of your dry beans, cooking them up and dehydrating them, please share with us down below. Especially share with us how you like to use them best. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.